There's a photograph from the Soviet war years that almost nobody outside one Russian city has ever seen. A young woman, barely out of her teens, and pinned to her coat the single highest civilian honor the entire Soviet state could give. The same decoration they handed to generals, to famous scientists, to men who had bent the course of the war. She had done none of those things. She had never fired a shot. She had never left her home region. So how does a teenage girl end up wearing the same medal as a general? To answer that, you have to know who was really building the tanks that broke the German army. And the answer is not the one in the history books, because more than 1,000 miles from the front line, in a city most of the world had never heard of, those tanks were being built by children. This is the story of one of them, a girl named Anna. And to understand what she did, we have to go back to the winter the Soviet Union was almost lost. In the winter of 1941, the country was losing. The German invasion had come that summer, and it had come fast. The great industrial cities of the West were falling one by one, and the factories that built the Red Army, its weapons were sitting directly in the path of the advance. So the Soviet state did something almost no one had ever tried at that scale, something that should not have been possible. It picked up its factories whole and moved them east. Entire plants were torn apart. Machines were ripped from their concrete footings, loaded onto railway cars, and sent over the Ural Mountains into the deep interior, beyond the reach of German bombers. Among them was a huge plant from Leningrad, with something close to 15,000 of its workers. A diesel engine works from Kharkov. They were carried east, across a freezing country, and set down in a quiet tractor town called Chelyabinsk. There, the evacuated factories were merged with the tractor plant already standing there, and almost overnight, a place built to make machines for farming became one of the largest builders of tanks on Earth. The workers gave it a name, Tankograd, Tank City. But here's the problem nobody talks about. A factory is only steel and floor space. It needed hands. And by the time those machines were finally running, almost all the hands that should have been there were gone. The men had been called to the front. So who was left to build the tanks? Look closely at the factory floor in those years, and you would not believe what you were seeing. The men who knew the machines had been marched off to war, and the people standing in their place were the people no one else had wanted to send, the women and the teenagers. This was not a noble gesture. It was desperation. By the plan for the early part of 1942, the workshops were meant to hold around 40,000 people. They held far fewer. The shortage was so severe that it threatened the tanks themselves. So the floor filled with workers who, a single year before, had been sitting in school. By the later years of the war, the workforce had swelled toward 60,000. And by the records kept in Chelyabinsk, more than 4 in every 10 of those workers were young, teenagers. Some barely past childhood. One of them would end up wearing that medal, but not yet. First, she was just another girl walking through the factory gates. Her name was Anna Pashnina. She was born in 1924, which made her about 18 when the war reached its worst. She worked in the section that made the small precision parts a tank cannot run without. The bolts, the fasteners, the fittings, the pieces nobody outside a factory ever thinks about, and that an army cannot move a single mile without. She ran a milling machine. A girl, standing at a machine in a building so cold that ice formed on the inside of the windows and bare metal burned the skin off your hands. And like nearly everyone on that floor, she had someone at the front, her father. Before he left for the war, he said something to her, something she would carry through everything that came after, something that, by the time it mattered most, would change what she was willing to do. I will tell you exactly what he said, but not yet. Because to understand why those words hit so hard, you first have to understand what that factory floor was actually like. And it was nothing like the posters. The shifts ran 11 and 12 hours, and longer when an order was urgent. There were no real weekends. People worked until they could not stand, and then some of them slept where they worked, on benches, on the warm metal near the furnaces. Because going home and coming back cost hours they did not have. There was never enough food. The ration was thin. The work was brutal. In the cold of the Ural winter pressed in through every wall. In the first half of 1942 alone, by one careful study, the evacuated plant lost something close to 500,000 working days to sickness and collapse. People simply broke, and we should not pretend the whole story is heroic. Some of the building work at Chelyabinsk was done by prisoners and later by prisoners of war. That part rarely makes it into the proud retellings. It belongs in this one because the truth is the only thing that makes the rest of it matter. This was the world Anna worked in. Cold, hunger, exhaustion, a clock that never stopped. And into that world came a new idea, a way to squeeze even more out of people who already had almost nothing left to give. They called them front brigades. The idea was simple, and it was merciless. Small teams of young workers would compete to smash through their quotas. to do the work of far more people than they had, to free up skilled hands for other tasks. Youth teams, named after fallen war heroes, driven by a single belief that the machine you stood at was your weapon, and the part in your hands was a round you were firing west. The records claim these teams routinely turned out half again, double, sometimes triple their quotas. Now, hold those numbers carefully. They were collected in a system that rewarded record breakers, that handed the best machines and the best conditions to the people setting the records, and that needed those records for its own propaganda. The figures are real in the sense that someone wrote them down. They are not gospel. But the people were real, and one of those brigades was about to be founded by a girl of 18. On the 6th of October, 1942, Anna Pashnina started Tank City's first front brigade, and there was something about it that no one had done before. It was made entirely of women. Around 20 young women joined her. The plan was almost absurd. This one small team would do the work of 50 trained workers, each girl running 2 machines, sometimes 3, moving between them, never stopping, in a freezing shop on too little food. And here is the part the legend always leaves out. At first, they failed. By Anna's own honest account, kept in the regional archive, the brigade did not begin as a triumph. The average age on her team was around 17, and in the early days, she admitted, they did not always meet the plan. They struggled, they fell short. That is the detail that makes her real. The propaganda version is a row of smiling girls hitting impossible targets on day one. The truth is, a teenager handed responsibility for 20 other teenagers. In a freezing building with a war being lost outside and not quite managing it. Not yet. So what changed? What turned a struggling brigade of teenage girls into a story still told in that city 80 years later? It came down to a single order and a single memory, because the worst of the war was still coming. And so was the moment Anna had been quietly bracing for since the day her father walked away. In the autumn of 1942, far to the west, the city of Stalingrad was being fought over street by street. The Soviet tank plant there, another great builder of armor, was falling, and the entire weight of supplying the Red Army with heavy tanks was shifting east, onto places like Tank City, onto floors like Anna's. And then a front order came down, urgent, the kind that meant men would be waiting on the result, somewhere out in the dark, in tanks that did not yet exist. This is the turn, the moment the whole story bends around. And this is where her father's words finally come back. Because when he left for the front, he had told her this, that he would be beating the German out there at the war, and that she should beat him harder, here in the rear. Now, we should be honest. That line comes to us through a wartime newspaper, in a country that knew exactly how to shape a story for the home front. The words may have been polished in the telling, but strip the polish away, and underneath is something simple and true. A father going to war, a daughter staying behind to build the very weapons he would fight with, and a quiet, terrible understanding passing between them, that they were now in the same war, on 2 different fronts, and that one of those fronts was a factory floor. So when that urgent order came down, Anna did not give a speech. She did something harder. She rebuilt how the work moved. She kept the girls on the floor longer. She drove her brigade's output up and up, from a little over the quota toward almost double it. And then there's the number she hit on her own machine, the one that stops you when you read it. Against a quota of 320 parts, Anna Pashnina produced more than 1,300, more than 4 times what was demanded of her. A girl of 18, in gloves, in the cold, turning out the small steel pieces that would hold a tank together long enough to reach the front. Slow down here, because this is the heart of it. It would be so easy to make this sound like a poster. A brave girl, a big number, a flag in the background. But think about what those hours actually were. The cold that never lifted, the hunger that was always there, the exhaustion that lived in the bones of everyone on that floor. An 18-year-old carrying 20 other teenagers on her shoulders, while her father was somewhere in the west. Alive or dead? She did not always know which. And now, one myth we have to kill, because you have probably heard it. The tanks did not roll straight off her line into battle. That image is everywhere, and it is not true. Chelyabinsk sat over 1,000 miles from the fighting. The tanks went west the slow way, by rail, across the same country those factories had crossed in the other direction a year before. But they went because of floors like hers, because of hands like hers. Over the course of the war, Tank City is credited with building something on the order of 18,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, along with tens of thousands of engines and millions of rounds of ammunition. Those are the plant's own proud totals, rounded and polished by the people who lived to tell them. But even allowing for the Polish, the scale is staggering. The southern Urals supplied a huge share of the country's heavy armor, and much of it passed, at some point, through the hands of women and teenagers who had never expected to build anything at all, Which brings us back to the photograph and the medal. For her work, Anna Pashnina was given 1,000 rubles, a voucher for a coat, a commendation. Her brigade received cash, food parcels, and passes to the canteen reserved for record setters. And in 1943, she was awarded the Order of Lenin, the highest civilian honor the Soviet state could give. A girl who had been a schoolchild just a few years earlier now wore the same decoration as generals. So that is the answer to the question we started with. That is how a teenage girl ends up with a general's medal pinned to her coat. But the story does not end the way you would expect, because what happened next is the part that should bother us. After the war, the floodlights moved on, the way they always do. The men who came home took back the factory floors, and the girls who had run those floors through the worst years of the war stepped quietly out of the story. Hannah lived on into the 1990s. But much of the rest of her life is not written down anywhere easy to find, which is its own kind of truth about how these stories end. The record keeps the medal. It does not always keep the person, and her father, the man whose words drove her through all of it. Whether he ever came home, the sources I trust simply do not say. Rather than invent an ending for him, it is better to leave that silence where it is. A great many fathers who said goodbye in 1941 never came back. Anna would have known the odds as well as anyone. So what do we keep from this? Not the number. The numbers are real, but they were always going to be shaped by the people who needed them. Not even the medal, though she earned it. What we keep is the floor, a cold building east of the mountains, full of teenagers doing the work of grown men who had been taken away to die. A girl of 18, running between two machines, her father's last words in her head, building the small, invisible pieces an army cannot move without. History remembers the tanks, the battles they won, the generals who pointed them west. It is much quieter about the children who built them, about the girls who held a factory together while the men held a front, and who were sent back to their ordinary lives the moment the men returned. They helped build the weapons that turned the largest war in human history. And then, mostly, they were forgotten. We made this so that one of them, at least, would not be. Anna Pashnina, the girl who built tanks, and earned a general's medal doing it. And if you are wondering how many other names like hers are still sitting in that small print, waiting, so are we. So stay with us. Because the moment before the fall is always the same. It is an ordinary person who has no idea yet what they are about to carry.